What's up everybody, and welcome to a new video. And in this video we're going to go over my notes for error handling in Python. And here I first want to cover here these general notes, and the first one states that usually a program is executed line by line. However, if there's an error, then the program breaks, i.e. it stops, no further lines are executed, and then an error or exception is raised. So to demonstrate that, I've prepared here this simple code snippet. So here we have these three print statements, and we're always just calculating 1 plus 1. So now if I run this, then you can see that it prints out here 2, 2, and then 2. And now, however, if I, for example, transform this 1 here into a string, then you can see that this first print statement here was executed. However, for the second print statement, then here we got this type error, and therefore then this third print statement was not executed anymore. So this is what happens when an error occurs. And then here I also want to quickly show what these two asterisks here are for. Namely, technically speaking, only a syntax error is called an error, and all other types of errors are called exceptions. I, however, use then here both terms interchangeably. Okay, so that is the first note that I wanted to cover. Then the next note states that there are two different approaches for handling the error. In most cases, what you do is you try to fix the error with the help of the traceback, which we talk about in a moment. And this way then, the error doesn't occur in the first place. So for example, here's the traceback for our error here. And it says that here at line 2, we get a type error because there's an unsupported operand type for this addition. Namely, we want to use here an integer with a string. So what we can do here is to add an integer here with a string. So now to fix that, we can simply transform here the string again back into an integer, and then again our code works. So this way then we have now fixed the error. So that's the first way how you can handle an error. And then in some cases what you also can do is you can catch the error with a try except construct, and we talk about that in the next video. And then in this way then the code keeps running despite a potential error. So to show that, let's again make this one here a string. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put the second print statement here into this try except construct. So therefore then here we say try, and then here we put in this print statement. So we try to execute it unless there's an exception. So except, in that case, then we're going to print simply here some error occurred. And now if I run it like this, then you can see that this first print statement here gets executed. The second print statement here doesn't get executed because there's an error. So therefore then we execute here this print statement. So here it says some error occurred. And then as you can see, this last print statement also gets executed, even though here this error occurred. Okay, so those are then the two different approaches for handling errors in Python. So now let's go over my notes for the traceback. And here I first have a definition, namely the traceback is a record of the function calls that were made, which ultimately led to an error. So to demonstrate that, I've prepared here this code snippet. So here we get some user input, and let's say that we don't know beforehand what that will be. And then here we put that user input into X and Y. And then after that, then we create here this variable called result, which is the result of this calculation where we divide X by Y. And then here at the end, we simply print out the result. So now if I run this, then we get here the following traceback. And here in this code origin section, the traceback tells us where this code is coming from. So in our case here, this comes from cell 1, and it is at line 4. Then here in this code section, we can see the actual line where the error occurred, and then also some surrounding lines for context. And then here in the error section, we see the type of the error that happened, and then also some information why it was raised. And here, just a side note, depending on where and how you run your code, this traceback here might look a little bit different. So for example, let's also run this code here in a Python file. So therefore I open here this Python file, and then paste in here the code, and then here let's run it. And then the traceback here now looks like this. So if you compare it here to our Jupyter notebook, then we can see that here in this code origin section, we now actually see here also the file path, then here the line, and then here it says in module. So this means that this error here occurred in the global space of our file and not within the function. So if it would have happened in the function, then we would see here the function name. Okay, so then next, we only here in the code section, we only see the line where the error occurred, and we don't have here any surrounding lines. However, then here we have this uptick where it shows us where the error actually occurred. So here it's in this division. And then here in this error section, this looks actually the same as in our notebook. Okay, so that was this little side note. And that is now how I define the traceback and what it looks like. Then the next note states that the traceback shows the most recent function call last. And to demonstrate that, I've prepared here this code snippet. So here what I've done is I simply put this part of the code into this divide numbers function. And then here I simply call that function. So now if I run this, then the traceback now looks like this, where we have here these two locations where the error might have occurred. In this last location here, this is actually within this divide numbers function. So this is the most recent function call. And then this location here is then actually where we called this function. So this is what I mean by this note here that says that the traceback shows the most recent function call last. So now let's go over these side notes here. And the first one is about working with modules or packages. Namely, in that case, the traceback usually contains code of the module and package, which you most likely don't want to change. So therefore then you need to go back in the traceback until you see your part of the code. So to demonstrate that, I've prepared here this code snippet. So here I'm importing the random module and then calling here this rand_int function. So now if I run this, then the traceback looks like this. And here in this last section, as you can see, this is not our code. So this is some code from the random module. And that's because that was the most recent function call. And most likely you don't want to change that. So therefore then you need to go back in the traceback until you find your part of the code. So here it is. And then here it says that we have a type error because the float object cannot be interpreted as an integer. So this float object here cannot be interpreted as an integer. So now to fix this error, what we can do, for example, is to transform this float into an integer. And then if I run it like this, then we don't get here this error. Okay, so this is what the traceback looks like when you work with modules or packages. And then the second side note states that the traceback for a syntax error looks slightly different. And to show that, I've prepared here this for loop. So let's run this. Then we get here this traceback. And here, as you can see, the code origin section looks the same as before. And also this error section. However, this code section here looks different to what we had before. Namely, here now we only have this one line and not any surrounding lines for context. And then here this time we also have here this up arrow, which indicates where the error actually occurred. So in this case, then here it expected a colon. So then if I put in here a colon, then we don't get an error. So that's the first example that I want to show. And then here I have another one, which is here this list. And then here we have again here the syntax error, and the error here is pointing at this 2, and it says invalid syntax, perhaps you forgot a comma. So then if I put in here a comma, then again we don't get the syntax error. Okay, so those are those two side notes. And with that then we've covered here all my side notes, and with that then we've also covered all my notes with respect to the traceback. So we've reached the end of this video, and then in the next video we will go over my notes for the try except construct. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.